righty. We are back at 7:36. David Birdsell, Perry Gershon, Dee Snider. First up, though, is John Brooks, the fine state senator representing the 8th Senatorial. And back with us. Always great to have him. Senator Brooks, how are you?
Good morning, Jay. How are you today?
I am doing well. Lots on the plate. And it's going to be a heck of a year, and I know you're at it regarding property tax relief and everything else. You put forth some legislation, some tax relief in the area of about $1.7 billion, Senator, for homeowners, and mainly, I guess, living in the school districts currently burdened, we all know, with an excessive overdependence of residential property taxes. And that for the funding of public education. We know it's a sticking point. Indeed, you're attacking it. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, absolutely right. We do have an absolute overdependence on property taxes. Many school districts across the state are funding more than 75% of the cost of education solely on residential property taxes. That's always been a problem. We've always recognized that real property taxes were not a fair way to fund education or anything else. The problem got even more compounded last year when we saw the impact of the new federal tax laws. At the end of the day, last April, we sent to the federal government an additional $15 billion in taxes as a result of the penalties associated with the cap on SALT deductions. $15 billion.
It's unbelievable. Big problem. Yeah, no question.
It is a big problem.
Now, Senator, I was reading, so this will actually put a cap of, 50% when we're talking about total school spending, right? That would be kind of a max tax level a district can actually affect the property. Is that correct?
Yeah, what we're saying is, so if you look at the way we fund education today, there are three principal funding sources statewide. There is state aid, there is a commercial property taxes, and there's residential property taxes. In the city of New York, they make greater use of income taxes. We're in a situation, as I said, many school districts are spending upwards of 70% and more of the cost of education solely on residential property taxes. What we're saying is we're going to cap residential property taxes at a total tax levy of not more than 50% of school districts spending, I should say. So that is going to bring some very significant tax relief across the state. The calculations we've done is going to come out to about $1.7 billion. Now, just to go to looking at the whole concept of residential property taxes, you're taxed based on the assessed or market value of your home. We make the assumption that's indicative of your financial condition. It's not. It doesn't take into consideration the mortgage you may have on your home. Perhaps someone in the house has significant medical expenses or someone just lost a job. It is a system that was good 100 years ago when we started. It's a system today that's not reflective of where you are. Some of the problems many of our districts have here on Long Island in particular is they have absolutely no commercial property tax base, so they get no relief there. And then depending upon how the formulas work for them, they get limited property taxes. Nassau County gets about 4.5% of the total state aid. That funds about 18% of the cost of education. And that means we're going to fund it either on commercial and property taxes on average 82% of the cost. Suffolk County gets about 8.5% of the total state aid budget. That funds about 30% of the cost of education. In Westchester County, their state aid is about 13% of total funding. So we put a very significant burden on local taxes. Then we take the new federal tax law, and that compounds the problem. So we need to change the way we fund education to make it more equitable, and we need to mitigate the penalty that we have with the new federal tax law.
stands out because what you're doing is you're placing a cap of 50% or so of total school spending. So you're talking about a max level. A district can actually affect a residential property. We know about the 70% as far as these districts are concerned, school districts drawing in excess of that, of its costs from property taxes. And we know about the 2% tax cap on that max annual increase in taxes. So in essence, it's about trying to make it a little more equitable, right? Kind of offset some of the costs here. And the 50% cap in place here is what you're saying.
Yeah, we have to do that. And we've got situations. We're in a situation now. People that, in my community, people bought houses when they were growing up maybe 50 years ago. They might have gotten a house for $8,000 back then. Today, their property taxes are more than they paid for the house. They're in a situation, again, using $8,000 just as a number, houses have appreciated for many reasons. So you might have a house that was bought for $8,000 that today is worth $700,000-$800,000. On paper, the person is very wealthy; they're house rich, but that's not reflective of their income. Many of these people are on fixed income, struggling to get by, and we're treating them like they're a millionaire. We've got to realize that we have a system that its day has come and gone. We have a federal tax law that penalizes us for our taxes, which makes no sense to begin with. And we're in a situation now, particularly people on fixed incomes and seniors, where they're having trouble staying in their home solely because the taxes are so high. And obviously, with the seniors, there's no one going to school in their particular house, but they're being asked to pay an exceptionally high burden.
With State Senator John Brooks. Now, Senator, a lot of people, when listening right now, especially under the educational umbrella, so to speak, they might think, all right, well, what about losing aid here? They hear this plan. What about these school districts losing any type of state aid? Is that something that is fearful of regarding your plan? What about that aspect?
Oh, that's actually fixed. We've made absolutely no changes to state aid at all. The formulas will stay the way they are. The funding will remain the same or perhaps increase depending on what we do with this year's budget. This takes no money away from anyone. It changes the manner in which we're paying for education. It reduces the excessive burden on residential property taxes. It's a program that's actually going to move in the direction of greater equality in terms of how we pay education across the state. So no one is losing any state aid whatsoever. We are reducing and giving relief to those districts that are at an excessive point, and when defining that excessive is greater than half the cost of education, we are providing relief from the federal tax laws at the same time to try to make that more equitable. It is a step towards what we need to do larger scale, and that is to change the way we fund government given the new federal tax laws.
At least it's out there. So in essence, ladies and gentlemen, if the district sees any type of reduction, it would pretty much be solely the result of a change, I would think, Senator Brooks, on the district level, reduced enrollment programs, that type of thing. That's how you would kind of see changes, if anything, not because of this, though, right?
Well, no, you're not going to see a reduction in aid that way. And one of the important things, this is pure tax relief. The way the program works, a school district will go through its normal budget process as it does now. You'll have the budget vote, and the budget will be approved. Then the tax relief money comes in. So just for a number, if a school district's going to get $20 million in tax relief, and their budget, let's just say, was a $50 million budget tax, when their budget goes over to the receiver of taxes, that tax credit would be applied. So, again, you've got a district that's going to have a $50 million tax levy for school district, and they're getting $20 million relief. When it goes over to the receiver of taxes, that $20 million will be applied at that point. The levy, because he'll already have the receipt of the $20 million, the levy will go out at $30 million instead of $50 million. So school districts cannot spend that money in a different way. They can't use it for additional spending. We are taking a 3-year look back in terms of calculating that 50%, so no one can suddenly change the way they want to fund their education and put more into a tax relief to a property tax levy to try to adjust the number. We're using a 3-year look back on this. The bill is for a 3-year cycle, and the objective is that we change the way we do some study and change the way we fund education over that 3-year period. So what we're doing is making sure it's pure tax relief, making sure that no district loses any state aid from where they are now, and that it reaches out and looks at only those districts that have an excessively high tax burden, and we're defining that as greater than 50%. And it is, like I say, pure tax relief.
I tell you, I kind of like it. It's almost like killing two birds with one stone, so to speak, because it kind of mitigates, Senator Brooks, the sting of this whole SALT deal. And also what you're doing is you're having more equitable funding in place as far as public education. I think that kind of sums it up in a nutshell.
The other two things that I would add, number one, it makes home ownership more affordable because we're reducing the tax burden, which I think is very important. One of the things that we're seeing right now in recent years is the percentage of people who own homes are beginning to drop. Many of the young people, if you speak to them about home ownership, they wonder whether that makes economic sense anymore. When you look at the cost of the home as high as it is, most people are financing that, paying significant interest costs associated with their mortgage, and then they're being asked to bear an excessive burden in terms of the percentage of funding they're providing for education and other services. So, if we don't change things, if we don't make it more possible and more affordable to own a home, less people are going to be buying homes. The value of homes may well decline over that passage of time. So it is way past time that we re-examine how we fund education. We have got to mitigate the penalty. Prior to the new federal tax law, New York State sent $48 billion more to Washington than they got in benefits and services. We just increased that by $15 billion. And the reason that we're paying the extra $15 billion is because Washington's decided our taxes are too high, so we're going to penalize you for that. You've got somebody, let's say, that today has a tax obligation of $20,000 for simple math. 2 years ago, they got that full credit on their federal taxes. This past year, they got credit for only $10,000, and then they paid taxes again on that additional $10,000. So what we're saying here, and if you've got a school district, and we'll oversimplify, let's just say that the adjustment is 25% reduction in their property taxes. That $20,000 becomes $15,000. That penalty is only on $5,000, not the $10,000. If somebody was in say a 20% tax bracket, on the current situation, they're obligated. Their total cost is about $22,000. With the reductions, their total cost is about $16,000. So, in a simple example, with someone at a 20% tax rate and a $20,000 tax levy, this legislation is really going to be in a situation of paying $22,000 under the current situation versus $16,000 under the REAP. It's meaningful change for people. And again, it makes home ownership more affordable. It helps our seniors on fixed income, and it's a step in the right direction on equality on school funding.
At least there's another option. It's a viable compromise because we know that the asking to strip SALT of the 10K and everything else, it's not going to happen. I know the governor's sounded off. We've heard from Chuck Schumer, Tom Suozzi, Congressional District 3. You don't get a good feeling about it, but at least with your plan, it is kind of a compromise, so to speak. You know, it kind of helps a couple of different areas. Go ahead.
We have to recognize what the new federal tax law does, and we have to make ways of mitigating it. And one of those ways is to reduce the property taxes, spread it over a much wider base, and eliminate some of that penalty. So, yeah, I mean, only a fool is going to stand there and look at what's happening right now to us under this federal tax law and say, well, there's nothing we can do about it. We have to do something about it. And we've got to recognize, too, that many of the expenses that some of these school districts are receiving are the direct result of how we're managing different federal programs, how we're managing immigration, for example, and the number of students that are coming into these districts. Basically, the federal government is in control of immigration. They're sending students into the districts. We're having to pay the educational costs. We're paying those educational costs principally by property taxes, and then we're being penalized for the expense associated with what is effectively a federal mandate. How can we stand for that?
Can't. Absolutely can't. Has to come to some sort of a head. At least your proposal will be somewhat meaningful. Let's see what it translates into. Talking with State Senator John Brooks, 8th District. Senator, before we let you go, obviously the contentious topic continues on bail reform, bandied back and forth. We had the governor on last week. We had you on last time, and you know, listen, you are at least thinking about what you can do to amend here. Some are not even considering that. I know a bit of a plan in place from the senatorial side of things as far as a bit of a compromise here. Not enough. Long Islanders are angry. What do you have to say about that? What do you expect to happen in the coming months? April 1st, we know it's part of the budget and everything else. April 1st, here comes the budget again. Whether the votes are there to accept it is another thing. Some have sounded off. They won't even vote on it until we're amended on this thing. What's your take here now?
So on the issue, I think there's two issues here, or more than two, but two principal issues. One on the discovery side first, with this 15-day limit. That is putting an incredible burden on small villages in this state and communities because of the time frames. I mean, we've got 15 days to put discovery together. It's going to be incomplete reports and the rest. I've put together legislation that will change the way that's being done. It will segregate, if you will, which types of cases are going to be subject to some of these time frames. Basically, it's going to extend the time frame out almost to 90 days in some cases and give tax relief because of the expenses to the communities. On the bail itself, we are looking hard at what's going on. We recognize, and I think everybody in the state will recognize, that you don't want somebody in jail because they can't meet a $250 bond, let's say, but they're in jail for a year and a half and have never gone to court. That doesn't work. So I think it was an objective rather, to get those people out of jail, and maybe we're going to do away with cash bond to begin with. But at the same time, what we saw happening is many of the people that were being released now were going back and committing another crime. You know, we had people robbing banks 2 and 3 times. We can't have a situation where people that are a danger to our society, people that are likely to recommit crimes, are just put back out on the street. We've got to realize we've got to give judges discretion as to who to hold and who not to hold. In some cases, people that are committing crimes actually have a mental health problem, and putting them back on the street makes no sense either. So I think we're going to see some meaningful changes in this legislation. There's ongoing negotiations, but I think we have to make changes to lessen the burdens on the small villages in terms of the discovery process, be more realistic in terms of how we're treating people with bail, and give judges some discretion when some of these people are coming before them. But there's no question that this program is not working the way people hoped it was going to work. There's no question that there are people almost making a mockery where they go and they rob a store, they rob a bank, go before a judge, are released, and go back and do it again. Those people belong in jail. So I think, it's clear changes are needed. We are working and meeting with people constantly, with some of our fellow senators here from Long Island. We've been meeting with members of law enforcement and 2 and 3 times a week discussing options. So there's a lot of work being done here. I'm optimistic that we're going to see meaningful change in the budget. If we don't, I don't see how I can vote for the budget. And quite honestly, if we don't make some changes on how we're funding education, I'm not sure how I can vote for the budget either. People in this state are overtaxed. The president of the United States, the tax reform that was passed by the Congress is penalizing us for the fact that we are overtaxed. We have been the largest donor state in the United States, meaning we send more money to the federal government than anyone else. There's no relief here. We're at breakpoint. We've got to give people relief. We've got to make housing more affordable. If we don't do any things on these taxes, people and companies are going to be leaving this state in numbers we've never seen. Now is the time to stand up and do stuff, and we've got to recognize what was done in these revisions on both the bail and the discovery need to be revised, and I think that is going to be part of this year's budget.
Here's the problem, the way Long Islanders see it, I think, Senator Brooks, is the flexibility involved right now with the Senate is apparent, okay? Change to be made, we get it. It's the Assembly I think many are fearful of right now, and especially by the leader in Carl Heastie. Basically the feeling we're 7 weeks into the year. Can we get more data? Basically stating the media is sensationalizing some of these cases. Completely disagree. The Jordan Randolph case is a template as far as why change is needed here. But I think many are fearful, from the likes of a Charles Levine to a Kevin Gorman to, you go right down the line all the way to a Judy Griffin out in Rockville Center. People are fearful of this if you're part of the Assembly as far as wanting change. It seems like the Senate is ready to bend a bit here. But as far as the Assembly, a lot of people don't see it that way. What about you? Final one.
Well, I think it's very simple. We are presenting some very common sense solutions here. When you take a step back and you see what was done and you see the problems that have fallen out, you've got to correct them. Everybody will recognize there were some people in prison that shouldn't have been in prison, but there were people in prison that belong there. And we've got to make sure that we change these rules so that people that present no risk to the community, and first offense, let them have the bail, if you will, and go through the legal process. The people that are repeat offenders, the people that are a dangerous society, belong in jail. We have got to put some common sense here, and I think the bail reform question, no different than what we're seeing in the school taxes, requires some common sense. To be penalized because our taxes are too high by an additional tax makes 0 sense. To have somebody in jail because they couldn't pay a $250 bond, at the same time we're paying the cost of imprisoning them, which is well in excess of what the bond cost was to begin with, makes no sense. And to say to a judge that he or she has no discretion when someone's before them makes no sense either. So I think we've got to get stuff done and move in the right direction.
Full powers, full discretion, no question with the judges. Listen, always a pleasure. We'll keep an eye on the tax relief and everything else, bail reform, all big-time stuff up there. We'll keep an eye on things. We look forward to the next time you're on, all right?
Sounds great.